Hi, I'm Yann Ilunga. Like always, I'm a podcasting and lead generation consultant. I've been podcasting for, it goes 7 years now. Crazy to think about it. I'm an international speaker. And as always, my co-host, my partner in crime here with me is...
Hi, everyone. I'm Connie Steele. I am an author, an executive consultant, business strategist, and marketer. And I've happened to work in tech for most of my career across Fortune 500, mid-sized, and startup companies. So I intimately understand the challenges with lots of your environments. And today, we're actually going to focus on a topic that I think a lot of you have been probably thinking about for your business, which is generating leads. But you can actually generate great leads through podcasting. So, Jan, why don't we start with you to provide really some great context of how you can leverage this medium that we've been talking about in all these sessions, really in all these interesting video series on how you can do so.
Yeah, I think when we talk about lead generation, oftentimes there are two dimensions. So to say that the topic or the area is addressed from, one has to do more with email marketing, so getting people to subscribe to your email list. And the other one is the one we're actually going to focus more on. And it's also what we focus on with our lead generation work. And we're talking about how do you actually get in front of people? How do you attract those that you consider targets? So those leads, those prospects that you want to convert into paying customers. And how can your podcast, your corporate podcast, help you build relationships and really attract those people and generate those leads? Well, I think the first step there is to actually look outside of your corporate podcast and look at what does your process look like? Do you even have a process? Does your company have a process? So when it comes to generating leads, acquiring customers for your business, what does that process look like? And you, Connie, have more experience than me in the tech space. So do you want maybe to quickly take it away and share a couple of examples of what that process, without complicating things too much, what that process may look like if you give us, for example, a couple of options, and then we can take those scenarios and discuss how the podcast could help those two companies or one company that has those two processes.
Sure. So for B2B companies, specifically, you have a sales team, right? So you want to arm your great sales network or this great team with valuable content or sales enablement materials that showcase really the thought leadership or the value in the products and services you offer, such that they realize, wait, you know what? You have something in which can really support our business. So for their target customers, that whole intent is to showcase what you can do for them and how it's differentiated. And what we talked about in previous episodes, right? How content is so important. Podcasting is a place where you can leverage that. So in that sort of flow of attracting the right customer or building a relationship with those customers, you have to create those sales enablement materials as a marketing team to then arm your sales force to then continually build the relationship. But the other piece too is if you are also trying to build that direct relationship with the customer, so in a B2C situation, but also maybe B2B too, you've got social promotion as well. You're about showcasing your value through the content too. So what are those insights, those words of wisdom, those really tips, advice, perspectives that you can promote, but it's really not about, it's less about pushing, it's about pulling people with that content promotion that you're doing in those relevant social channels to have people say, hey, yeah, that is a problem that I have. This is a need I have been trying to solve. And it's clear that you understand the pain that I'm going through. Now you're top of mind and I'd like to consider you as an option. And because now there's, that voice behind, all this great work that's showcasing it. It's like, oh, well, I like how they sound. They sound very authentic. They sound like they really care. That's just that other experience, because again, as we think about, how are you attracting people, it's all about pulling people. It's all about building a relationship now. And so, as a marketing function, as really a company, you are trying to be clear about who that target audience is. How do you build a relationship with them through the content to then continue that more in-depth conversation and see how you can help? So, Yann, what would you add to that?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think you really did a great job at painting the picture of a couple of possible scenarios. I think for me, keeping in mind what you said as the foundation of our conversation here, or keeping that at the back of our mind, is I would start by thinking of what kind of degree of involvement we want a lead or a prospect to have when it comes to our podcast. And I'll be very specific. You can get people involved with the content in different ways. One could be that you say, okay, we want to interview prospects. So you have an opportunity of actually sitting down with them and have a conversation that to some degrees may not be completely different than a sales conversation you may have, or a conversation you may have during a sales call. Another example could be you say, well, we want to actually showcase some of our customer success stories. So we share case studies. So in that case, you may not want necessarily to interview your customers. Perhaps you only have some snippets here and there, but you are going to share their stories, what their pain points were, and how you help them overcome them. So in that case, you pull people through the story itself. So with the first option I mentioned, how do you pull people? Well, you make them sort of co-producers of the content. So you interview them and they get to share the spotlight with you with all the, let's say, pros and cons that can bring about. Second scenario, you say, all right, we aren't gonna physically, so to say, interview the customers of ours, but we're gonna attract leads. We're gonna use our customer success stories, our case studies as a magnet to attract those that are interested. Perhaps you want to select customers you have helped across different industries or that have different, I don't know, demographics or whatever, so that a different case study, a different story would speak to different segments of your target market. And then the other option, which I would say is the more mainstream one, is actually not pulling people through interviews or through case studies, but is to actually pull them through a combination of the content you share, whatever that looks like or sounds like in the case of podcast, and then an actual next step that you want them to take. That could be to call for a free consultation, to book an appointment, to fill out a form. It goes back to the process you typically have leads follow to, let's say, to enter your funnel, to enter your ecosystem. What does that look like? You need to start thinking about that. And then you want to keep in mind how podcast listening works, because it's very, very important. It's going to have an impact on your conversion rates. Connie, do you want maybe to, as somebody who has been a podcast host, a podcast guest, and a podcast listener, do you maybe want to talk about how podcast listening and the way people listen to podcasts has an impact then on conversions? Because it's one thing to listen while we're in front of our computer, but it's a different story for listening while we are, for example, out for a walk with our dog.
Sure. So it's something that we've talked about, I believe, in some of these previous videos. But when somebody is listening to that voice on a podcast, you have a greater level of intimacy with that individual, and they feel that they could have a greater connection with you. So by hearing their voice, the tempo, the tone, really that genuineness of the message they're trying to convey, you have a greater opportunity to build a level of trust and credibility in this medium that doesn't quite exist in written form. And the other piece too, while you could say, well, wouldn't I get that in video? Well, just the way that you're watching and hearing versus just purely listening, does have a different emotional feeling
Mhm.
towards, that connection that somebody may have, which is why you see radio having been around, sort of that first original way to advertise, right? And people getting connected and having a feeling, walking away and having this sort of memory of what is going on. And I believe there's a statistic where people are more likely to remember and have recall of content or information that's conveyed in radio versus sort of a visual format, or an audio format versus a visual format. So I think what's really important is that, to one of your points, is that through podcasting, it can create a really interesting lead magnet through the messages that you're conveying about what your company does, its point of difference, the way that you fundamentally operate, the success stories that you can prove the value, such that at the end of the day, what your prospective customers want is proof that you can do what you say you're doing. And they want clarity in the way that you're approaching it. Because let's face it, anybody can go out there and say, we're great, we do X, we do Y. All right. But if you're able to go deeper and showcase that how and substantiate that in a way that, like, yeah, you know what? I believe I trust you now. That's where you're going to move that along, right? So, and for those people who are part of B2B companies, the people who are the greatest salespeople are the ones that have the best relationship with customers. It's not because of volume. Honestly, if you're playing a volume game, it's actually going the opposite direction. It's because they believe and trust the people who are selling the product that can truly help their business. So, Jan, what else would you add? Is any other perspective you would consider where when we think of sort of leads for or leveraging podcasting for leads, anything else you would expand upon when it comes to, I'll say, repurposing your content to be a lead magnet, which we spend a lot of time on the value of repurposing?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a different video where we really talk about repurposing. So if you're here with Connie and I, and you and your team are wondering, how can we repurpose the content we have created? Definitely watch the video. But yes, Connie, absolutely. I have three things to share. The first one, I would say, don't forget about your partners, about the people or companies you collaborate with, because interviewing one of them, for example, could be an excellent way to attract their community, to use them, so to say, or leverage that interview as a sort of bridge between you, your company, and that target market, those target customers. And the bridge is the person or company you feature on your podcast and the conversation or conversations you have. And this applies not only for you as a host, but also as a podcast guest. In case you do interviews, keep that in mind, that you can really form great relationships with people, with companies, and collaborate in many different ways. And lead generation, driving referrals your way, it's one of them. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, and this is not only true for lead generation through corporate podcasting, but also for actually sales, to sell products or services through corporate podcasting, or even podcasting more in general. And is that you want to make sure that everything is as aligned as possible. In other words, the content you share, actually, even before that, your company, what it stands for, how it operates, what it focuses on, the content of the episode or even series of episodes or season, and then the call to action, that next step you would like for listeners to take, they should be as aligned as possible. And if that next step is something that, for example, you say, we want you to get access to our software, or we want you to get this product or try out this service, consider making an irresistible offer that is unique to those listeners, so that we'll have that extra incentive of saying, oh, wow, I get to benefit from this as a listener. I wouldn't be able to find this anywhere else, not on their website, nowhere else, but as a listener, as a loyal fan of the show, I get this benefit. That's the second thing. Now, the third thing, Connie, related to your question about repurposing the content for lead generation purposes, actually, it's connected to what I just said. So try to think about what your company focuses on, the content of the podcast, the next step, what you sell, what you provide, and try to connect all of that as much as possible. And you can do so with your podcast, but you can also package it in different forms of content. It could be a PDF, an ebook, a report. It could be a special video training that is maybe available only for those who have listened to your podcast. I think it's important to think about leveraging what you may already have. So you may already have, for example, a white paper that you've used for certain purposes. Can you leverage that for your podcast or for your social media content? It's always about being strategic, because I think you could just throw spaghetti at the wall and hope that it sticks. But if you take a step back, you go back to the drawing board and you say, all right, who are we trying to reach? What do we help them with? What is it that we focus on? How do we work? How can the podcast help us achieve those goals, reach those people? And once we have reached those people, what would we want them to do? Because I think that's also something to keep in mind. It's not only about, well, we want to try to reach as many potential customers as possible, but it's also about, all right, once you've reached them, what would you like them to do? Is it fill out a form? Is it make a phone call? Is to visit a physical store, your premises? It's important to really think about those different things.
I 100% agree. And then we've probably hammered home this message a lot in all the videos, but having that clarity of your overarching strategy and ensuring, to your point, again, about the fact that everything needs to be aligned will make it so much easier for you to operationalize everything. Because then you'll know what lead magnets you may want to use as part of that podcast episode, as Yann had said. So, it all comes down to you being very clear about what you're trying to do, who you're targeting, what value can you create in the content you're delivering through your podcast. But to add to that, what's that added freebie that you may want to add to continue to pull them in further so you can build that relationship? So could it be that call to action to download an existing white paper that you have, to have the free consultation, which you had mentioned, Yann? But what are those other valuable activities or resources that you can offer in which can enable you to continue to nurture the relationship? Is really what this is all about. And this medium is one great way to help you do it throughout the entire process. So, Yann, I would love your last minute point of view of anything else that people need to consider when they think about leveraging podcasting to drive leads.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that it's important is, how do you actually track how your podcast is impacting, in this case, lead generation? Well, it depends, because it depends on what that next step is. I'll give you a practical example. If your next step is for people to fill out a form or to visit a landing page or something like that, then you could use a tool like Bitly, which I know you, Connie, are familiar with, or something similar to Bitly, which is called Jot, so J-O-T URL. And what those tools enable you to do is to create some special links that not only are easy for people to remember, which is always great, because when people listen to podcasts, they also do something else. So if you share a very long link, the chances of them, meaning the listeners, remembering the link are very slim. But if the link is very straightforward, easy for them to remember, guess what? They are more likely to take action on it. And not only that, but those tools, Bitly, Jot URL, there is plenty of other options, also enable you to track the performance of those links, meaning how many people have clicked those links. So if you have a specific page and you have different ways to drive traffic to it, perhaps you run Facebook ads or whatever, you can create a unique link that it's connected to the call to action you share on your podcast, so that you can actually see for the specific episode. Because unfortunately, as of today, a podcast media company or media hosting companies don't don't really have a way for us to actually track things like click-throughs. So if people actually clicked on a link, because oftentimes the link we share have nothing to do with the company we use to host our podcast content. But if you use something like Bitly, JotURL, or similar, you can see, oh, in this episode, we had X many people who listened or who downloaded, and we got Y number of clicks. And then you can see, for example, the signups. If people need to sign up, you can say, oh, okay, we had this many listeners, that which led to this many clicks, which led to this many sign up forms. And then, if there is, for example, an appointment you want people to take, then you would track that. But I think trying to think about tools that are outside the podcasting world at the moment is the best way for now to go about tracking the effectiveness of how your podcast performs, in this case, for lead generation purposes.
Those are really great insights, because it's very true that in this space right now, as much as podcasting has exploded, there are still so many aspects of the medium that's still quite nascent and somewhat in its infancy. So the level of analytics that people are quite used to through Google are nowhere in the same realm in the podcasting space. So, there's just a much more limited set that you can work with. But I think that insight is really important. So,
yeah. And we're here to help. So if, for example, after watching this, you're like, yeah, we need to start to plan a lead generation campaign connected to our podcast as soon as possible, but you aren't sure how to go about things, we are here, right, Connie?
Absolutely. So for those of you who are looking for just more resources to better understand podcasting, you can visit us at flywheelassociates.com/podcasting. You'll find a white paper there that we've done, but there are other great articles to help you, and a way to reach out to us and for us to help you, engage and have a consultation with you. So thanks so much. And we appreciate you listening to our video series.